You may have noticed from time to time you'll end up with medications prescribed for your pet which look like they're human medications. And that's because they are. But are there any human medications you can't or shouldn't give your pet? I'm Dr. Cath Watson, welcome to the PD Vlogs. Today we're going to talk about human medications you should never give or be very careful about ever giving to your pet. First up, size matters. So drugs have different doses depending on your size. So giving a human medication to a chihuahua or a cat obviously means you're giving a massive dose compared to what they would normally need for their size. Well, the size really does matter for the dose of many medications. Metabolic rate, so that's how fast our metabolism works, also has an impact. So sometimes we find that actually doses for smaller animals like rabbits can be higher than we'd expect for, say, a human dose. So when we're talking about human medications though, there are some specific medications we need to be really careful and aware that are not safe to give to our pets. The really common one that we get asked a lot about is pain medications. So obviously most people will have at home something like ibuprofen or paracetamol, really common in almost everybody's first aid kits and readily at hand at home. So why wouldn't you just consider about giving maybe a smaller dose, as we've talked about dose dependency, to your cat or your dog? Well, I'd strongly encourage you to please seek advice before you do this because there are some real dangers there. So in particular, ibuprofen in dogs. So this has a number of different brand names, but ibuprofen is the drug name. Naproxen is similar. These are known as non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drugs. Really effective, and there are some that we can safely use in cats and dogs. But ibuprofen and naproxen are not among them. So please do not give these to your dog. You're likely to end up with stomach ulcers at worst, or at best you could end up with renal damage. Worst case scenario, you could actually end up with a dead dog when all you're trying to do is relieve some pain. So please seek advice before you even remotely consider giving any form of pain relief that you may have at home to your dog. Slightly different for cats. I'm not suggesting you go and crack out the ibuprofen for them, but the other common one we have at home is paracetamol. This is not safe for cats. It can cause acute liver failure. Please never ever consider giving it to your cat. So when it comes to any form of pain relief in cats and dogs, if you think you've got stuff hanging around at home and you think they're in pain, please give your vet a call and seek advice before you give any medications, because trying to reverse the effects of those medications is almost impossible, and then you're left with dealing with the problems that can arise from them. And like I say, the death can absolutely be the worst outcome and you don't want to go there. A slightly different category of drug would be antidepressants. Now these actually are used from time to time in cats and dogs. However, there's a whole range of them and not all of them are safe. And again, that dose dependent, size matters, the dose is important. So really important that you get some advice as to what the safe dose would be to use for a cat or dog. And obviously, if you're thinking your cat or dog is depressed, then you really should be seeking some advice as to what's going on, because there's likely to be some underlying health concerns there that are best dealt with in a holistic manner rather than just throwing some medication you might happen to have at home at them. When it comes to attention deficit disorder, ADHD type medications, these obviously contain stimulants. Do you really want your cat or your dog to be bouncing off the walls any more than maybe they already do? So please keep any of these sort of medications well out of reach of animals. I don't think you necessarily want to see the side effects of those. On the opposite end of the spectrum, people will often have sleeping medications, benzodiazepines, these sort of calming type medications around. You need to be aware that in cats in particular, benzodiazepines can be quite harmful, particularly to the liver, and particularly if they end up having them over a prolonged period of time. But also in both cats and dogs, sometimes you can get the opposite effect to what you think you're going to get. So instead of having a nice, calm, relaxed, chilled type effect for your cat and dog, seeing them relaxing, sometimes you'll actually see a hyperstimulated animal, and obviously that's not really what you're after at all. When it comes to heart medications and blood pressure problems, many of these issues are really specific to us as humans, partly to do with our lifestyle, partly to do with genetics, but cats and dogs often don't end up with those arterial narrowings and so on from plaques and so on that we see in humans. So therefore the medications we use to treat heart disease can be quite different. And some of those human medications, particularly things like beta blockers, while they can be used in animals for specific issues, again, very dose dependent and very problem dependent, they can have a really severe side effect on animals if they're dosed inappropriately. So please keep any heart medications or blood pressure medications well out of the way of animals. And then the final one I want to talk about is cancer medications. Now obviously these are usually very specific for the cancer being treated, so you want to know what you're treating. Cancer medications are usually aimed at trying to kill cells that are unwanted, but they can have the side effect of killing cells that are wanted. So please keep cancer medications well out of reach. Don't try and treat what you think is potentially a cancer in your patient without seeking advice as to what that is. And obviously, particularly when it comes to chemotherapy, our aims for human treatments of cancers can be a wee bit different for animals. So really important you understand what you're trying to treat and why. But with any medications that you are taking yourself or for your animals, please seek advice before you do, because it's going to be safest for everybody in the long run.